The Dead Lover. Author, Théophile Gautier. My brother, you're curious to know if I have ever loved? Well, yes. Mine is a unique and terrifying story, and even though I'm 66 now, I'm always super hesitant to stir the ashes of a memory like that. But I'm gonna tell you everything. In any case, I would never tell a story like this to someone with less life experience than you. These events are so strange that I almost have trouble believing they actually happened to me. The thing is, for a little over 3 years, I was at the mercy of a singular and diabolical illusion. I, a poor village priest, was living a double life every night in my dreams. God willing, it was only a dream. A life of partying, of sin, a life like a rich pleasure seeker. All it took was one look, maybe a little too appreciative, at a woman to almost send my soul to hell. But luckily, in the end, with the help of God and my patron saint, I managed to cast out the evil spirit that had possessed me. At one point, my life had become seriously complicated with a supplementary nightlife that was in complete contrast to the other. During the day, I was a chaste priest, fully focused on prayers and holy things, but at night, as soon as I closed my eyes, I transformed into a stylish young gentleman, an expert on women, dogs, and horses, a gambler, drinker, blasphemer. And when I woke up at dawn, the impression I had was more like I was just going to sleep then, and dreaming I was a priest. From that sleepwalking life, I'm left with the unfortunately indelible memory of words and things I never should have seen. And even though I've never left the walls of my parish, you'd think, hearing me speak, that I was instead a man who'd seen it all, who, after having maximized all the pleasures the world offers, got into religion to finish his over-the-top day in the bosom of God. You wouldn't think I was the humble seminarian I truly was, who then grew old in a totally obscure rectory, lost in a forest where I never had the chance to keep up with modern life. Yes, I loved like perhaps no one in the world has ever loved, with a furious love, so intense, that I'm amazed my heart never burst under such strain. Phew! What nights! I felt the calling to become a priest since I was a kid, so all my studies were aimed at that goal, and my life, until I was 24, was nothing but a long training period. After finishing my theology studies and passing all the minor orders, my superiors considered me worthy, despite my extreme youth, to cross the last and most fearsome threshold. It was set that I would be ordained a priest during Easter week. Until then, I had never been outside the college and seminary grounds. I vaguely knew that something called a woman existed, but I never dwelled on it. I was completely innocent. I only saw my old and sick mother twice a year, and that was my only connection to the outside. I didn't regret anything, and I didn't feel the slightest hesitation before the irrevocable commitment I was about to make. I was full of joy and impatience. I believe no bride has ever counted the hours separating her from the wedding with more feverish ardor than I did. I couldn't even sleep, excited by the idea of being able to say Mass. To be a priest. I couldn't conceive of anything cooler in the world. I would have refused to become a king or a poet. My ambitions peaked right there. I'm telling you this to show you how what happened to me next didn't make sense, because I was the victim of an inexplicable fascination. When the big day arrived, I headed to the church with such a light step that I felt like I had wings on my back. I thought I was like an angel, and I was puzzled by the worried looks on my companions' faces, because many of us were going to receive the orders. I had spent the night in prayer, and I was in a state of high excitement, bordering on ecstasy. The bishop, a venerable old man, seemed to me like God contemplating his own eternity, and through the church vaults, I could see heaven. You, brother, know all the details of the ceremony: blessing, communion, anointing of the palms with the oil of catechumens, ending with the holy sacrifice, which is offered in unison with the bishop. I won't dwell on that. Oh, how right Job was! How careless it is not to make a pact with your own eyes beforehand. By chance, I suddenly lifted my head and, just like that, I saw before me, so close I could have touched her, even though, in reality, she was quite far, a young woman of rare beauty, dressed like a queen. It was as if scales fell from my eyes. I experienced the sensation of a blind man suddenly regaining his sight. The bishop, who had been so splendid until that moment, immediately faded, the candles paled in their gold candelabras, like stars at daybreak, and the whole church went pitch black. The mesmerizing creature stood out from that dark setting like a divine revelation. She seemed to be illuminated by herself, and to be a source of light. I lowered my eyelids, determined never to raise them again, to shield myself from any suggestion that might come from outside, because, truly, I felt more and more lost and knew less and less what I should do. A minute later, I reopened my eyes, because, even through my eyelashes, I saw her shining in a purple twilight, as if I were staring at the sun. Wow, she was beautiful. The greatest painters, even when they try to make the divine portrait of the Virgin and seek to represent an ideal type of beauty, don't even come close to that fabulous reality. No painter's palette, no poet's verse could do her justice. She was tall, with a waist and a goddess-like posture. Her hair, light blonde, parted on her forehead, falling over her temples like two golden streams. She looked like a queen in her outfit. Her forehead, of an bluish and translucent whiteness, was clear and serene above the arches of her dark eyelashes, a contrast with her sea-green pupils, which possessed an unbearable vivacity and sparkle. What eyes! With a single glance, they could decide any man's fate. They had a life, a transparency, a fire, a brilliant moisture I had never seen in human eyes, shooting rays like arrows straight into my heart. I still don't know if the flame that lit them came from heaven or hell, but, for sure, it came from one or the other. This woman was an angel or a demon, maybe both. She wasn't just another girl. Her teeth were oriental pearls that illuminated her red smile, and with every flick of her mouth, small dimples formed on the rosy satin of her adorable cheeks. Her nose was of a finesse and a majestic haughtiness, revealing an undeniable noble origin. Precious agates and blonde pearls, the same color as her neck, which descended upon her chest, played on the radiant skin of her semi-bare shoulders. From time to time, she raised her head with a serpentine movement, like a snake or a peacock, which made the lace collar embroidered around her neck, like a silver mesh, tremble. She wore a gown of pearlescent velvet, from whose wide ermine sleeves emerged aristocratic hands, incomparably delicate. Her long, sculpted fingers were so perfectly transparent that they let the light pass through, like the dawn filtering into the night horizon. I have those details as present as if they had happened yesterday, and although I was intensely confused, nothing escaped my eyes, not even the smallest detail, the mole on her chin, the barely perceptible down at the corners of her lips, the velvet of her forehead, the trembling shadow of her eyelashes on her cheeks. I was catching the slightest detail with surprising clarity. As I watched her, I felt doors opening within me that I hadn't even suspected existed until then, and life was revealed to me in a totally different light. It was as if I was being born into a new existence, to another set of ideas. A terrifying anxiety was crushing my heart, and every minute that passed seemed to me both a second and a century. The ceremony, anyway, continued, and carried me further and further away from that world, whose entrance my newly born desires were furiously bending down. Nevertheless, at the fatal moment, I said yes. I would have wanted to say no. Everything in me rebelled and protested against the violence my tongue was doing to my soul. A hidden force tore the words from my throat, against my will. Something similar must happen to the many young women who go to the altar with the firm resolve to reject the forced husband imposed on them. When the moment comes, none of them follows through. Something similar must happen to all the poor novices who end up taking the veil, even when they were very determined to rip it to shreds at the moment of the vows. You don't dare to cause a scandal like that in front of everyone, or disappoint the expectations of so many nice people. You can sense the whole will of every person present, woven and concentrated in your answer, their fixed gazes pressed down like a slab of lead. And besides, everything is so perfectly prepared, everything is so well arranged in advance, and it seems so obviously irreversible, that any personal reaction collapses under that enormous weight and can only give way definitively. The gaze of the beautiful stranger gradually changed expression as the ceremony continued. At first tender and caring, it became more and more tinged with a kind of disdain and disapproval, as if expressing discontent at not being listened to. I made an effort that, in itself, would have been enough to move a mountain, trying to express my will not to become a priest in a shout. But I failed, my tongue was glued to my palate, and it was impossible for me to communicate my intention with the slightest negative gesture. I was, though awake, in a kind of nightmare, where you try to shout a word that your whole life depends on, without achieving the desired result. She seemed sensitive to the martyrdom I was suffering and, as if to encourage me, she shot me a look full of divine promises. Her eyes were a poem, where each gaze constituted a song. It was as if she were telling me, if you would be mine, I would certainly make you happier than God can make you in paradise. The angels would be jealous. Tear up that funeral shroud they are about to cover you with. I am beauty, youth, life. Come to me, together we will be love. What could your God offer you in compensation? Our existence will flow like a dream, and it will be only one long, eternal kiss. Throw out the wine from the chalice they offer you, and you will be free. I will guide you to unknown islands. You will sleep on my breast, in a bed of solid gold, under a silver canopy, because I love you, and I want to snatch you away from God, towards whom so many noble hearts pointlessly pour out torrents of love that don't even reach him. I felt these words accompanied by music of infinite sweetness, because her gaze had something sonorous about it, and the phrases her beautiful eyes transmitted to me resonated deep in my heart as if an invisible mouth were whispering them into my soul. I was very ready to give up God, but meanwhile, I continued mechanically fulfilling all the formalities of the rite. The beautiful woman gave me a look as supplicating as it was desperate, which was as if sharpened blades pierced my heart. Too late, it was done, I was a priest. I believe no human face ever expressed a more heart-wrenching anguish. The girl who sees her fiancé fall beside her, suddenly struck down by a syncope, the mother who finds her child's cradle empty, Eve at the gate of paradise, the miser who finds a stone where he hid his treasure, the poet who has let the only copy of his most inspired manuscript fall into the fire, definitely do not have a more desolate and inconsolable expression. She turned white as marble, her beautiful arms fell along her body. She leaned on a pillar, as if her legs could no longer support her. As for me, I was pale, my forehead bathed in sweat hotter than that of Calvary. I was suffocating, staggering. I headed towards the church door. I was choking. The vault seemed to crush my back. I felt as if I alone had to support the entire weight of the dome. I was about to cross the threshold when a hand abruptly grabbed mine, a woman's hand. I had never touched one. It was cold as a snake's skin, and yet it left me a sensation as hot as the mark of a branding iron. It was definitely her. You fool! What have you done? She murmured, disappearing immediately into the crowd. The old bishop passed by me, looking at me with a severe air. In fact, my demeanor must have seemed very strange. I paled and blushed constantly, and for no apparent reason. My head was spinning. One of my companions took pity on my condition, bothering to accompany me back. Alone, I certainly wouldn't have found the way to the seminary. Turning a corner, while my companion was looking in another direction, a small page boy the color of ebony, strangely dressed, approached me and, without stopping, handed me a small, preciously decorated wallet, signaling me to hide it. I slid it into my sleeve, and only took it out when I was alone again in my cell. I flipped the latch. Inside there was nothing but 2 small slips of paper with these words, Clarimonde, at the Concini Palace. I was so little aware of worldly things at that time that I knew nothing about Clarimonde, although people were talking about her a lot around there, and I also completely ignored where the Concini Palace was. I made 1,000 conjectures, one more wild than the other, but, truly, what mattered to me was managing to see her again, and I didn't care much if she was a great lady or a high-class courtesan. That newly born love had taken root indestructibly, and I didn't even think about the possibility of getting rid of it. That woman completely dominated me now. With a single look, she had made me a new man, she had shown me her empire over me, and I existed only in her and for her. I was driven by madness. I kissed my hand on the spot she had touched, I repeated her name for hours. I just had to close my eyes to see her as clearly as if she were really present, and I repeated over and over the words she had spoken at the church door. You fool, what have you done? I realized the horror of my situation, and all the saddest aspects of my state were clearly revealed to me. Being a priest meant remaining chaste, not making love, never caring about sex or age, averting my eyes from all beauty, behaving like a blind man, always dragging myself through the icy shadow of a cloister or a church, only having contact with the dying, watching over the corpses of strangers, and always wearing mourning with that black cassock that, without any change, could very well serve as a shroud to wrap myself in the coffin. I felt my life like an internal lake that grows and overflows, my blood pulsed crazily in my arteries with violence, and my youth, long choked, suddenly burst forth in an uncontrollable explosion, like the aloe that takes a century to bloom and opens with the violence of thunder. How could I see Clarimonde again? I couldn't find any excuse to leave the seminary, since I didn't have any friends in the city. Besides, I wasn't even supposed to stay in those places. I was expecting to be assigned to a parish. I tried to tear out the bars of my window, but it was at an impressive height, and besides, I didn't have a rope ladder, so it was useless to think about it. On the other hand, I could only go down at night, and how would I have navigated the maze of streets, which I barely knew? All these difficulties, which perhaps would have been insignificant for someone else, seemed insurmountable to the miserable seminarian, newly born to love, without experience, without money, and without clothes. Ugh! I said to myself, blind to all reason, if I hadn't been a priest, I could have seen her every day, I would have been her lover, her husband, I told myself, and, instead of finding myself wrapped in this sinister shroud, I would wear silk and velvet clothes, a gold chain, a sword, and plumes, like all proper gentlemen. My hair, instead of receiving the humiliation of a wide tonsure, would curl around my neck in a movement of ringlets. I would have a beautiful mustache, I would be a dashing ladies' man. Instead, a single hour spent before an altar, some half-word articulated reluctantly, had been enough to completely remove me from the number of the living. I myself had built my tomb, I myself had bolted the lock on my prison. I looked out the window, the sky was wonderfully blue, the trees had put on their spring attire, nature shone with a joy that seemed mocking to me. The town square was full of people coming and going. Young couples, embracing, headed towards the shade of the gardens and arbors. Some processions passed by, amidst drinkers' songs and choruses. Such movement, the momentum, and the general joy made my struggle and my solitude stand out even more pathetically. A young mother was playing with her little son at her doorstep. She kissed his little rose mouth, pearl-studded with drops of milk, and made him goo-goo eyes with those 1,000 little silly things only a mother can do. The husband, standing near them, smiled sweetly at such a tender sight, and his arms crossed over his heart seemed to embrace happiness. I couldn't bear such a scene. I closed the window and threw myself onto the bed, my heart full of uncontrollable hatred and jealousy, biting my fingers and the cover, like a tigress with 3 days of hunger would do. I don't know how long I was like that, but as I tossed and turned on the bed with furious spasms, I suddenly saw Abbot Serapion standing motionless in the middle of the room, studying me intently. I was ashamed of myself and, letting my head fall on my chest, I covered my eyes with my hands. "Romualdo, my brother, something is off with you," Serapion said peacefully, after a few minutes of silence. "Your conduct is truly inexplicable. A pious, calm, and gentle being like you is thrashing around in his cell like a wild beast. Be careful, brother, not to listen to the devil's temptations, because the evil spirit, irritated to know you are now consecrated to the Lord, is lurking around you and making one last effort to drag you towards him. Instead of letting yourself get down, dear Romualdo, put on a strong armor of prayers and mortifications, and fight the enemy hard, only then will you conquer. The trial is necessary for virtue, and gold comes out of the finest crucible. Don't be afraid or lose heart. The most seasoned souls have suffered moments like this. Pray, meditate, fast, the evil spirit will retreat." Abbot Serapion's speech helped me to get a grip and regain some calm. "I came to announce your appointment to the parish of C. The priest who had it until now has died, and the bishop has designated you to succeed him. Be ready tomorrow." I nodded, and the abbot left me alone again. I opened the missal and began to read a prayer, but the words blurred before my eyes, the ideas confused in my mind, and the book slipped from my hand without me doing anything to stop it, leaving tomorrow, without having seen her again. Adding a further impossibility to all those already standing between us. Losing forever the hope of finding her, unless by a miracle. What if I wrote to her? Who on earth could I trust, dressed as I was in the holy vestments? I felt an unbearable anguish. What the abbot had said about the devil's tricks came back to mind, the strangeness of the whole adventure, Clarimonde's supernatural beauty, the phosphorescent glow of her eyes, the burning touch of her hands, the confusion she had plunged me into, the transfiguration that had happened to me, my devotion that had melted away in an instant. Everything clearly proved the presence of Satan, and perhaps that silky hand was nothing more than the glove covering his claw. These thoughts caused me immense terror. I picked up the missal and returned to prayer. The next day, Serapion came to get me. 2 mules were waiting at the door, with our meager luggage. Riding through the city streets, I anxiously scanned every window to see if Clarimonde would appear in it, but it was still very early, and the city hadn't opened its eyes yet. My gaze tried to penetrate beyond the curtains covering the palace windows along our route. Serapion must have attributed this interest of mine to admiration for the elegant architecture of those places, because he slowed down his mount to give me time to see everything. Finally, we reached the city gates and began to ascend the hill. From the top, I turned one last time to see the places where Clarimonde lived again. The shadow of a cloud covered the entire city. The blue and red roofs were scattered in a general half-light, over which the morning smoke floated like white clumps of foam. Due to a singular optical effect, a building that surpassed all the nearby constructions, immersed in the fog, stood out, gilded by the only ray of light, and although it was actually more than a league away from us, it seemed very close to me, and I could distinguish all its details, even the smallest ones, towers, rooftops, windows, and even the swallow-tailed weather vanes. "What is that palace illuminated by the sun?" I asked Serapion. He shielded himself from the light with his hand and answered, It is the old palace that Prince Concini gave to the courtesan Clarimonde. It seems to be the scene of abominable parties. Just at that moment, whether it was real or an illusion, I thought I noticed a small, clear figure on the terrace that shone for a second and then faded. It was Clarimonde. Did she perhaps know that at that very moment, from the top of that rough path that took me even further away from her side and that I would never descend again, ardent and restless, I was devouring her house with my eyes? A teasing play of lights seemed to put it within my reach, almost inviting me to enter as its master. Certainly, she must have known. Her soul was too in tune with mine not to feel my own turmoil, and this was surely the feeling that had prompted her, even wrapped in her night veils, to go out onto the terrace as morning began. The shadow swallowed up the palace too, leaving only a motionless ocean of roofs before me, beyond which nothing else could be distinguished but a mountainous ripple. Serapion spurred his mule, and mine followed. A curve in the path removed the city of S from my sight forever, a place I was never to return to. After 3 days of travel, through some very desolate fields, we saw the rooster emerge from the top of the church bell tower where I was to serve. Following a winding path, surrounded by huts and corrals, we found ourselves before the building, which was not magnificent. A vestibule decorated with some ribbing and 2 or 3 pillars of roughly carved ceramic, a tiled roof and sandstone buttresses like the pillars, was everything. To the left, the grassy cemetery, with a large iron cross in the center. To the right, in the shadow of the church, the presbytery, very bare and poor. It was a house of extreme simplicity, of an austere dignity. We entered. Some chickens were pecking scant grains of oats on the ground. Apparently used to the black habit of the ecclesiastics, they weren't surprised by our presence at all, and barely bothered to let us pass. A weak, rusty bark was heard, and we saw a dog approach. The animal belonged to my predecessor. It had dull eyes, gray fur, and all the symptoms of the highest age a dog can reach. I stroked it tenderly, and it also started walking beside me with an air of indescribable satisfaction. A woman, just as old, who had been the housekeeper of the old priest, came quickly to meet us, and after having me enter a simple ground-floor room, she asked me if it was my intention to keep her on. I responded that I would keep her, as well as the dog and also the chickens, and all the furniture her master had left her upon his death, which put her in a state of euphoria. For his part, Abbot Serapion immediately paid the price she asked. My lodging sorted out, Abbot Serapion returned to the seminary. I was thus left alone with no one to lean on but myself. The memory of Clarimonde began to obsess me again and, despite the efforts I made to shoo it away, I didn't always succeed. One afternoon, strolling among the boxwood-lined path of the small garden, I thought I saw a feminine shape through the foliage that followed my every movement, and the glint between the leaves of 2 sea-green irises, but it was only an illusion, and after crossing to the other side of the path, I found nothing more than the print of a foot on the sand, so small it could be mistaken for a child's foot. The garden was surrounded by super-high walls. I searched every nook and cranny, but there was no one. I could never explain those circumstances which, for that matter, were nothing compared to the crazy events that were about to happen to me. I lived like this for over a year, fulfilling the obligations of my state to the letter. I prayed, fasted, comforted and helped the sick, gave alms until I only had enough for my basic needs, but deep down I felt an extreme spiritual drought. And the fountains of grace remained dry for me. I didn't enjoy that satisfaction that comes from fulfilling a holy mission. My ideal was further away, and Clarimonde's words often returned to my lips like an involuntary earworm. Oh, brother, think about this carefully. Just by having looked up at a woman once, for a fault so seemingly minor, I suffered the most miserable turmoil for many years. My life was messed up forever. I won't dwell on this series of challenges and internal victories, always followed by the deepest relapses, and I will move immediately to a decisive event. One night, there was a violent knock on the door. The old housekeeper went to open it, and a dark-skinned man, richly dressed, was framed in the doorway by the light of Barbara's lantern. Something about his appearance initially frightened the old woman, but the man reassured her and told her he had come to fetch me for a task that concerned my ministry. His mistress, a great lady, was dying and wanted a priest. So Barbara let him up. I was already getting ready for bed and replied that I was ready to accompany him. I took what was needed for the last rites, and quickly followed him. At the door, 2 horses black as night were restlessly snorting and a soft smoke rose from their nostrils. The man helped me mount one of the 2 steeds, and jumped onto the other, resting only one hand on the saddle. He pressed his knees and let go of his horse's reins, which took off like an arrow. Mine, whose rein he also held, followed it, eating up the road, and stayed neck and neck with his. I saw the earth disappear beneath us, gray and furrowed, the dark outlines of the trees fled to the sides like a defeated army. We crossed a forest so gloomy and icy that a shiver of superstitious terror ran down my skin. The sparks that our horses' hoofs struck from the stones formed a trail of fire behind us, and if anyone could have seen my guide and me at that hour of the night, they would have taken us for 2 specters riding an incubus. The manes of the 2 horses became more and more tangled, streams of sweat ran down their flanks, and they panted breathlessly, but when I saw them getting tired, the squire, to revive them, gave a guttural cry that was nothing human, and the race regained even greater fury. Finally, the whirlwind stopped, a black shadow dotted with lights unexpectedly rose before us. The pace of our mounts resonated louder on an iron-plated floor, and we passed under a sinister dark archway that opened between 2 immense towers. There was great activity in the castle, flocks of servants, torch in hand, crossed the courtyard in all directions, and various lights slowly went up and down. Confusedly, I could glimpse immense architectures, archways, columns, ramps, a set of constructions worthy of a royal palace. A small black page boy, the same one who gave me Clarimonde's note and whom I instantly recognized, helped me dismount, and a butler, dressed in black velvet with a gold chain around his neck, came toward me, leaning on an ivory cane. Thick tears ran from his eyes onto his white beard. "Too late, father," he said, shaking his head. "Too late. But if you didn't make it in time to save her soul, at least come and watch over her body." He took my arm, and led me to the death chamber. I was crying as much as he was, because I had guessed that the deceased was none other than my Clarimonde, so desperately loved. There was a reliquary next to the bed, a bluish flame, which flickered in a bronze bowl, illuminated the entire room with its weak and uncertain light, and made the corners of some furniture or a cornice wink in the shadows. On top of a table, in a carved urn, lay a withered white rose, whose petals, except for one that still remained, had fallen next to the vase, like perfumed tears. A torn black mask, a fan, disguises of all kinds were scattered on the armchairs, and made it clear that death had arrived suddenly and unannounced in that luxurious mansion. I knelt down, not daring to look at the casket in the middle of the room, and began to recite the Psalms with fervor, thanking God for having placed a tomb between that woman and me, which allowed me to mention her name, now sanctified, in my prayer. But gradually my holy fervor diminished and I began to daydream. That room had nothing of a death chamber. Instead of the fetid, deathly air I always breathed in such places, a languid scent of oriental essences, a certain aphrodisiac smell of woman, floated sweetly in the warm air. The pale light of the room seemed more like an illumination purposefully arranged for sensuality than the livid reflection that ordinarily flickers near a corpse. I thought of the singular circumstance that had made me find Clarimonde again just as I was losing her forever, and a sigh of grief escaped my chest. I thought I felt a sigh behind me too, and instinctively turned around. It was only the echo, but in that movement, my eyes fell on the casket that I had previously tried not to look at. The draperies of purple damask revealed the deceased, stretched out, with her hands joined over her chest. She was covered with a linen sheet, of a dazzling whiteness, which stood out even more next to the blood-red color of the draperies and was so subtle that it failed to conceal anything of the seductive relief of her body. Rather, she looked like an alabaster statue chiseled by a skilled sculptor for a queen's tomb, or better, a sleeping young woman upon whom snow had fallen. I couldn't hold back any more. That bedroom air exalted me, the feverish aroma of the half-withered rose went to my head, and I walked in long strides across the room, stopping continuously at each column of the bed to contemplate the beautiful deceased, under the transparency of the shroud. Strange thoughts passed through my mind. I imagined that she was not really dead, and that everything was a ploy of hers to lure me to the castle and speak to me of her love. For a few moments, I thought I saw her foot move beneath the whiteness of the veils, disturbing the folds of the shroud. And then I told myself, is it really Clarimonde? What proof do I have? The little black page could have changed mistresses. I'm crazy for despairing like this. But my heart replied, it's her, of course it is. I approached the deathbed, and looked with even greater intensity at the cause of my torture. Should I confess it? The perfection of her forms, although purified and sanctified by the shadow of death, disturbed me more than I expected, and that rest was so similar to a simple sleep that anyone could have been fooled. I forgot that I was in that place for a funeral service, and I felt like a husband who enters the chamber of his young wife for the first time, who modestly covers her face. Overwhelmed by pain, swept away by joy, trembling with fear and pleasure, I leaned toward her and slowly lifted the corner of the shroud, holding my breath for fear of waking her. My veins throbbed with such force that I felt them buzzing in my temples, and my forehead was sweaty as if I had lifted a marble tombstone. It was indeed Clarimonde, as I had seen her in the church the day I was ordained a priest. She was as seductive as ever, and death only added an extra layer of charm. The pallor of her cheeks, the faint pink of her lips, her long eyelashes tracing a shadow on that whiteness gave her an expression of melancholic chastity and absorbed suffering of an indescribable attraction. Her long, loose hair, among which blue flowers were still tangled, framed her head, hiding the nakedness of her shoulders among its curls. Her beautiful hands, purer and more transparent than the sacred host, were folded in a gesture of pious rest and prayer, and this softened the appeal that the exquisite roundness and ivory tone of her bare arms, which still wore pearl bracelets, might have simulated, even in death. I remained absorbed for a long time in that silent contemplation, and the more I looked at her, the less I could convince myself that life could have truly abandoned that marvelous body. I don't know if it was a mirage or the reflection of the lamp, but I got the impression that blood was flowing again under the dull pallor. Nevertheless, she remained motionless. I lightly touched her arm. It was cold, but no colder than her hand when it brushed mine under the church doorway. I again inclined my face toward hers, pouring the warm dew of my tears onto her cheeks. Ah! What a bitter feeling of despair and helplessness! What an agony that vigil was! I wished I could gather my existence to give it to her and blow the fire that consumed me onto her cold body. The night wore on and, feeling the moment of eternal separation approaching, I couldn't avoid the sad and supreme sweetness of placing a soft kiss on the lips of the one who had all my love. Oh, miracle! A faint breath joined mine and Clarimonde's lips responded to the pressure of my mouth. Her eyes opened, regained their light, and she, sighing, separated her arms and wrapped them around my neck, with an air of unspeakable ecstasy. Romualdo! she said in a languid, sweet voice, like the last vibrations of a harp. "What are you doing? I waited for you for so long that I died. But we are engaged. I will be able to see you and come to you. Farewell, Romualdo, farewell. I love you and I will offer you this life that you reclaimed in me for an instant with a kiss. See you soon." She reclined her head back, while her arms still held me tight. A gust of wind sharply opened the window and entered the room. The last petal of the white rose trembled like a wing for a few seconds on the end of the stem before letting go and flying out through the open window, taking Clarimonde's soul with it. The lamp went out and I fell unconscious onto the chest of the beautiful deceased. When I came to, I found myself lying in my bed, in the small bedroom of my rectory while my predecessor's old dog licked my hand that hung outside the blanket. The old housekeeper was fidgeting in the room with elderly agitation, opening and closing drawers, or mixing powders in the glasses. Seeing me open my eyes, Barbara gave a little cry of joy. The dog barked wagging its tail, but I was so weak that I couldn't say a word or make any gesture. I later learned that I had remained in that state for 3 entire days, giving no other sign of life than an almost imperceptible breath. Those days don't count in my life. I don't know where my spirit was during that time as I have no memory of it. The housekeeper told me that the same dark-skinned man who had come to fetch me at night had brought me back the next morning in a litter, leaving immediately. As soon as I could think clearly, I mentally reviewed all the circumstances of that fatal night. At first I thought I might have been the victim of an illusion, but the existence of real and palpable circumstances soon destroyed this hypothesis. I couldn't believe I had dreamed since the housekeeper saw the man with the 2 black horses, of whom I remembered how strange he was. However, no one knew of the existence in the vicinity of a castle, similar to the one where I saw Clarimonde again. One morning I saw Abbot Serapion enter. Barbara had let him know that I was ill and he came straight away. Despite his diligence, which showed affection and interest towards me, I was not pleased as I should have been. Father Serapion had a penetrating and inquisitorial look that bothered me. I felt confused and guilty in front of him, as he had discovered my deep turmoil and I feared his clairvoyance. While asking me about my health, in a hypocritically sweet tone, he fixed his yellow, lion-like pupils on me, and sank his gaze into me like a probe into the depths of my soul. Then, he asked me some questions about how I managed my parish, if I was comfortable there, how I spent my free time, what my favorite readings were, and other insignificant questions of that kind. I answered him briefly and he himself moved from one topic to another without waiting for me to finish. The conversation, clearly, had no relation to what he had actually come to tell me. Suddenly, without any preamble, as if he had suddenly remembered something he was afraid of forgetting, he said to me in a clear and vibrant voice, which echoed in my ears like the trumpets of the Last Judgment. The courtesan Clarimonde died a few days ago after an 8-day and 8-night orgy. It was a crazy, hellish thing. The horrifying events of the feasts of Belshazzar and Cleopatra were repeated. What a century we live in, my God! The guests were served by black-skinned slaves who spoke an unknown language and who, in my opinion, are nothing but demons. The uniform of the lowest servant would have been gala wear for an emperor. Many strange legends have circulated about Clarimonde, and all her lovers have ended miserably or violently. It has also been said that she was a vampire woman. But for me, she is Beelzebub himself. He fell silent, observing me even more intently, as if to see the effect his words had on me. I had not been able to avoid a gesture when I heard Clarimonde's name mentioned, and the news of her death. Besides the pain it caused me because of its strange coincidence with the nocturnal scene I witnessed, it produced a confusion and terror that showed on my face, although I did everything I could to control myself. Serapion gave me a worried and severe look. Then he said, My son, I must warn you. You have one foot over an abyss, be careful not to fall into it. Satan uses patient tricks, and tombs are not always definitive. Clarimonde's tombstone should be closed with a triple seal, because it seems this is not even the first time she has died. May God watch over you, Romualdo. And Serapion, turning his back on me, slowly left. I did not see him again, as he left for S immediately afterward. I was completely recovered, and had now resumed my usual duties. The memory of Clarimonde and the words of the old abbot were always present in my mind, even though no extraordinary event had come to confirm Serapion's dire warnings. I was beginning to think that his fears and mine were excessive, when one night I had a dream. I had barely fallen asleep when I felt the curtains of my bed being drawn back. I got up abruptly and saw a feminine shadow standing before me. I immediately recognized Clarimonde. She held in her hand a small lantern of the type placed in tombs, whose glow made her slender fingers even more transparent, giving them a pink coloration that faded gradually to the opaque and pink whiteness of her bare arm. Her only clothing was the linen shroud that covered her in her deathbed, whose folds she held over her chest as if ashamed of being so barely dressed, but her small hand could not completely achieve her intention. She was so white that the whiteness of the linen merged with the pallor of her flesh under the faint ray of the small lamp. Wrapped in that fine fabric that betrayed all the contours of her young body, she looked more like the marble portrait of an ancient bather than a living woman. But dead or alive, statue or woman, shadow or body, her beauty was always the same, only the greenish light of her pupils was slightly dimmed and her mouth pale. She placed the small lamp on the table and lay down at the foot of the bed, then she leaned over me and said, with that voice of hers, at once silvery and velvety, which I never heard in anyone else. I made you wait a long time, dear Romualdo, perhaps you thought I had forgotten you. But I had to come from so far away, and from a place from which no one returns. There is no sun or moon in the country I come from, nor space, nor shadow, nor path for the foot, nor air for the wings, and yet here I am. My love is more powerful than death and will eventually conquer it. So many pale and terrible faces I have seen on my journey. With what pain my soul, returned to life by the force of will, had to adapt again to my body. What a struggle to lift the earth they had covered me with. Look, the palms of my hands are bruised. Kiss them, only that will heal them, my love. She applied her cold palms to my lips, one after the other. I kissed them many times, while she looked at me with a smile of unspeakable pleasure. I confess to my shame that I had completely forgotten the advice of Abbot Serapion, and my own clerical habit. I had fallen without offering any resistance at the first assault. I hadn't even tried to reject the temptation. The coolness emanating from Clarimonde's skin penetrated mine, and I felt sensual shivers run through my body. Poor girl. Despite everything I later saw, I still feel bad believing she was a demon. At least she certainly didn't look like one, and Satan has never disguised his tricks better. She was lying on the side of my humble bed, in an attitude full of carefree coquetry. Every now and then she ran her hands through my hair and formed curls as if testing the effect, around my face, of various hairstyles. I let her do it with the most culpable complacency, while she accompanied her gestures with the most seductive talk. I loved you long before I even saw you, dear Romualdo. And I searched for you everywhere. I saw you in the church at that fatal moment and immediately said to myself, that's him. And I shot you a look with all the love I had and would have for you. That look was capable of condemning a cardinal, of making a king kneel at my feet before his court, but you remained unmoved, preferring your God. Ah, how jealous I am of God, whom you love more than me. How unhappy I am. I will never have your heart all to myself, for me, whom you resurrected with your kiss, for me, Clarimonde the dead, who for you has forced the tomb and comes to dedicate my life to you, which I only regained to make you happy." Each phrase was interrupted by frantic caresses, which dazed me to the point that, to console her, I dared to utter a terrible blasphemy and tell her that I loved her at least as much as God. Immediately her pupils lit up. "It's true. You love me as much as God," she exclaimed, embracing me. "Since that's the case, you will come with me and follow me wherever I go. You will leave those ugly black clothes. You will be the most handsome and most envied of gentlemen, you will be my lover. It's not bad at all to be the recognized lover of Clarimonde, of the one who rejected a pope. What a sweet and golden life we will lead. My lord, when do we leave?" "Tomorrow. Tomorrow," I cried in my delirium. "That's fine," tomorrow Clarimonde continued. "I will have time to change. The dress I'm wearing is too meager, it's not suitable for a long journey. I also need to notify my servants who still think I'm dead. Money, clothes, carriage, everything will be ready tomorrow. I will come for you at this same time. Farewell, my heart." She barely brushed my forehead with her lips, the small lamp went out, the curtains closed again, and I saw nothing more. A heavy sleep, a nightmare-free sleep, enveloped me, leaving me unconscious until the next morning. I woke up later than usual, and the memory of that singular apparition disturbed me all day. I eventually convinced myself that it had been the result of my overactive imagination. However, the sensations had been so vivid that it was difficult for me to believe they were not real, and not without apprehension, I went to bed at night, after praying to God to free me from all wicked thoughts, and protect the chastity of my sleep. I immediately fell into a deep sleep, and the dream from the previous day resumed. The curtains opened, and Clarimonde appeared, no longer pale in her white shroud and with the violets of death on her cheeks, but cheerful, confident, and splendid, in a superb green velvet dress embroidered with gold and gathered on one side to reveal a satin skirt. Her blonde curls escaped from a wide black hat, laden with white feathers placed whimsically. She held a small whip trimmed in gold in her hand. She touched me gently and said, "So, Sleeping Beauty? Is this how you prepare? I thought I would find you awake. Hurry up, there's no time to lose. Get dressed and let's go." I jumped out of bed. "Go on, get dressed and let's go," she said, pointing to a bundle she was carrying. "The horses are bored and champing at the bit at the entrance. We should already be 10 leagues from here." I dressed immediately. She herself handed me the clothes, taking them out of the package she had brought, laughing at my clumsiness, and showing me their correct use, when I got it wrong due to the rush. She combed my hair herself, then presented me, when I was ready, with a pocket mirror made of Venetian glass with silver filigree, saying, "Do you like it? Do you want to hire me as your personal valet?" I was no longer the same. I bore no more resemblance to my former self than a statue does to the formless stone block from which it was carved. My old figure seemed to be nothing more than the clumsy sketch of what the mirror reflected. I was handsome, and my vanity was sensibly boosted by this metamorphosis. Those elegant clothes, that rich, fully embroidered jacket, made me a completely different person, and I was amazed at the power of a few yards of well-cut fabric. The spirit of the clothing permeated my skin, and after 10 minutes I had already acquired a certain vain air. I took a few steps back and forth in the room, to gain a certain ease of movement. Clarimonde watched me maternally, satisfied with her work. "Okay, enough of the games, dearest Romualdo. We have to go far, it's time to set off if we want to get there." She took my hand, pulling me with her. All the doors opened before her, at her mere appearance, and we passed the dog without waking him. At the door we found Margaritone, the squire who had guided me the first time. He held the reins of 3 black horses, one for each of us. These horses must certainly have been born of mares fertilized by Zephyr, because they ran faster than the wind, and the moon, which rose at the moment of our departure to light our way, rolled across the sky like a wheel detached from a chariot. We saw it jump from tree to tree and struggle to keep up behind us. Soon we appeared on a plain where, next to a grove, a carriage with 4 vigorous horses was waiting for us. We got in and the coachman made them gallop in an insane manner. My arm was around Clarimonde's waist and I squeezed one of her hands while she rested her head on my shoulder and I could feel the brush of her semi-naked neck on my arm. I had never been so happy. I forgot everything and no longer remembered having been a priest any better than I remembered being in my mother's womb, so strong was the seduction that the evil spirit exerted on me. From that night onward, my nature, in a certain sense, doubled. There were 2 men in me, one of whom did not know the other. Sometimes I thought I was a priest who dreamed every night of being a young gentleman, other times a young gentleman who dreamed of being a priest. I could no longer distinguish dream from waking life and did not know where reality began and illusion ended. The frivolous and promiscuous young gentleman mocked the priest detested the dissolute actions of the young gentleman. 2 spirals fitted into one another, without ever touching nonetheless, would well represent the image of that 2-headed life that was mine. Despite the strangeness of this situation, I do not believe, however, that I was even momentarily close to madness. I always retained a very precise perception of my 2 existences. There was only one absurd fact that I couldn't explain, that is, the feeling of the same I that could subsist in 2 such different men. It was an anomaly that I did not account for, whether I believed myself to be the priest of the small town of, or Signor Romualdo, Clarimonde's recognized lover. The fact remained that I was, or believed I was, in Venice. Even today I have not been able to fully figure out how much was real and how much was illusion in that strange adventure. We lived in a spectacular marble palace on the Grand Canal, rich with statues and frescoes, with 2 Titians from the best period in Clarimonde's bedroom. It was a palace fit for a king. We each had a gondola at our disposal with its gondolier, and its singer bearing our coat of arms, our music room, and our poet. Clarimonde understood living large, and there was something of Cleopatra in her nature. As for me, I led a prince's life, and I was acting like a big shot, as if I belonged to the family of one of the 12 apostles or the 4 evangelists of the Serenissima Republic. I wouldn't have stepped aside to let the Doge himself pass, and I don't think that, after Satan's fall from heaven, there has been a person more arrogant and insolent than me. I went to the Ridotto and gambled like crazy. I frequented the best society, rich kids, also ruined, actresses, scammers, freeloaders, and swordsmen. However, despite the wild lifestyle, I remained faithful to Clarimonde. I loved her to death. She had satisfied my desires and stopped my promiscuity. Having Clarimonde was like enjoying 20 different lovers, like possessing all women, so changeable, volatile, and diverse she was, a true chameleon. She made me commit the infidelity with herself that I would have committed with others, fully taking on the character, manner, and type of beauty of any woman who seemed attractive. She returned her love to me multiplied by 100, and it was in vain that the young patricians and even the old men of the Council of 10 made her magnificent proposals. Even a Foscari came to her to propose marriage, she rejected them all. She had enough gold and only wanted love, a young, pure love, awakened by her and which was supposed to be the first and the last. I, in turn, would have been perfectly happy if it weren't for a damned, recurring nightmare every night, which made me believe I was a village priest torturing himself and doing penance for his daytime excesses. Reassured by the habit of being with Clarimonde, I no longer even thought about the strange way we had met. However, Abbot Serapian's words sometimes returned to my memory, awakening a certain unease. For some time, Clarimonde's health was getting worse. Her complexion grew paler and paler every day. The doctors understood nothing of her illness, and didn't know what to do. They prescribed useless remedies, and didn't come back. But she continued to grow visibly paler, and her skin was always colder. She was white and almost lifeless, as on that infamous night in the unknown castle. I was desperate to see her waste away like this. Moved by my grief, she smiled sweetly with the melancholic expression of those who know they must soon die. One morning I was having breakfast next to her bed, so as not to leave her alone for a minute. While cutting fruit, I accidentally made a rather deep cut on my finger. The blood immediately flowed in a red stream, and a few drops splashed Clarimonde. Immediately her eyes shone, her face took on an expression of wild joy that I had never seen in her. She leaped out of bed with animal agility, like a cat or a monkey, and pounced on my wound, beginning to suck it with indescribable pleasure. She sipped the blood in short gulps, slowly and with delight, like an expert savoring a sherry or a wine from Syracuse. She half closed her eyes, her round green pupil had become oblong. Every now and then she paused to kiss my hand, then continued pressing her lips over the lips of the wound, trying to draw out a few more crimson drops. When she saw that no more blood was coming out, she stood up, with moist, brilliant eyes, more rosy than a May dawn, her face restored, her hand warm and moist, in short, more beautiful than ever and in perfect health. "I won't die any more. I won't die any more," she cried out, ecstatic with joy, clinging to my neck. "I can love you even longer. My life is in yours, and everything I am comes from you. A few drops of your rich and noble blood, more precious than any elixir, have brought me back to life." This scene left me thoughtful for a long time, sparking the strangest thoughts about Clarimonde. That same night, as soon as sleep brought me back to my rectory, I saw Abbot Serapion again, more serious and more worried than ever. He observed me carefully and said, "Not content with losing your soul, now you want to lose your body too. Unhappy young man, you have fallen into a trap." The tone with which he pronounced these few words deeply affected me, but that impression didn't last long. Many things distracted my attention from the scene. However, one night, in a mirror, whose deceptive position she hadn't calculated, I saw Clarimonde pouring a powder into the cup of flavored wine that she usually prepared for me after dinner. I took the cup, pretended to bring it to my lips, and then placed it on a piece of furniture, as if intending to finish it later, but as soon as the beautiful woman turned her back, I quickly poured it out under the table. I then went to my room, and lay down on the bed, determined not to sleep to see for myself what would happen. I didn't have to wait long. Clarimonde entered in her nightgown and, removing her veils, lay down next to me on the bed. She made sure I was truly asleep, then exposed my arm and, taking a gold pin from her hair, began to murmur. "A tiny drop, just a tiny drop, a red speck on my pin. Since you still love me, I shouldn't die yet. My poor love, I will drink your beautiful, bright blood. Sleep, my darling, sleep, my God, sleep, my child, I will not harm you, I will only take as much of your life as I need so that mine does not fade away. If I didn't love you so much, I could use the veins of any other lover, but, since I met you, everyone else disgusts me. What a beautiful arm, round, white. I hesitate to prick this lovely little vein, my love." And while she spoke, she wept, and I felt her tears fall on the arm she held in her hands. Finally, she made up her mind, made a small incision with the pin, and began to suck the blood that flowed. As soon as she had sipped a few drops, the fear of draining me led her to put a small band-aid on it. After rubbing the wound with an ointment that healed it immediately, I could no longer doubt, Abbot Serapion was right. However, despite the certainty, I couldn't stop myself from loving Clarimonde, and I would have gladly given her all the blood she needed to prolong her artificial existence. Moreover, I didn't even feel great fear. The woman restrained the vampire, and what I had seen and heard fully proved it. Besides, I had plentiful veins that could not be drained so quickly, and I wasn't willing to haggle for my life drop by drop. I would have even opened my veins myself, saying to her, "Drink, and may my love infuse your body with my blood." I avoided mentioning the narcotic and the pin scene, and our union remained perfect. Only my priest's scruples continued to torment me as never before, and I didn't know what new forms of self-punishment to invent to dominate and mortify my flesh. Although all these visions might be involuntary, and I was not guilty of them, I dared not touch Christ with hands so impure and a spirit impregnated with such debauchery, whether real or a product of sleep. To avoid falling victim to those painful hallucinations, I forced myself not to sleep, holding my eyelids open with my fingers, and remained standing, leaning against the walls, fighting with all my strength against sleep. But the sandy feeling of drowsiness soon irritated my eyes and, seeing all struggle was futile, I let my arms drop in discouragement and fatigue, and the current dragged me back to those treacherous shores. Serapion directed the most energetic exhortations to me, and reproached me for my weakness and lack of fervor. One day when I was more anxious than usual, he said, "To free yourself from this obsession there is only one remedy, and, even though it is extreme, it must be adopted. I know where Clarimonde was buried. It is necessary to dig her up, and for you to see the pitiful state of the object of your insane love. You will no longer be tempted to lose your soul for a filthy being, devoured by worms, about to crumble into dust. You will surely come back to your senses after this experience." I was so worn out by that double life that I consented. I wanted to know once and for all who, between the priest and the young gentleman, was the victim of an illusion. I was determined to kill, for the benefit of one or the other, one of the two men who lived in me, or even to annihilate both, because such a life could not last. Abbot Serapion provided himself with a hoe, a crowbar, and a lantern, and at midnight we went to the cemetery of whose layout he knew by heart. After illuminating several tombstones with the lantern, we finally arrived at a stone semi-hidden by grass, and devoured by moss and parasitic plants, on which we deciphered the beginning of an inscription: "Here lies Clarimonde who was, while she lived, the most beautiful in the world." "It is right here," said Serapion, and placing the lantern on the ground, he inserted the crowbar into the terminal fissure of the stone, and began to lift it. The stone yielded, and he began to work with the hoe. I watched him, gloomier and more silent than the night. As for him, bent over his macabre task, he was drenched in sweat, panting, and his strained breathing seemed like the death rattle of a dying man. It was a strange spectacle, and anyone who had seen us would have taken us for grave robbers or shroud thieves, rather than two priests. Serapion's zeal had something hard and savage about it that made him look more like a demon than an apostle or an angel, and his face with large, austere features, deeply marked by the reflection of the lantern, was not at all reassuring. I felt a cold sweat run down my limbs, the hair stood up on my head. Deep within myself I saw the austere Serapions act as an abominable sacrilege, and I wished that a triangle of fire would emerge from the dark clouds that heavily circled above us to reduce him to dust. The owls, perched on the cypresses, disturbed by the glare of the lantern, came to heavily beat their dusty wings against the glass, emitting painful moans. Wolves howled in the distance, and 1,000 sinister noises tore through the silence. Finally, Serapion's hoe struck the coffin, and its boards were heard to resonate with a dry and sonorous sound, that dreadful dull sound that comes from nothing when it is touched. Serapion opened the lid, and I saw Clarimonde, white as marble, her hands clasped. The white shroud wrapped her as her only clothing. A small red drop looked like a rose at the corner of her pale mouth. Serapion, seeing her, became furious. "Here you are, demon, shameless courtesan, drinker of blood and gold." He sprinkled the body and the coffin with holy water, and traced a sign of the cross with the aspergillum. Poor Clarimonde, barely splashed by the holy dew, crumbled into dust. Nothing remained but a shapeless mixture of ashes and half-calcined bones. "Behold your lover, Signor Romualdo," said the inexorable priest, showing me those sad remains. "Would you still be tempted to take a stroll on the Lido and Fusan with such beauty?" I lowered my head. A great collapse occurred within me. I returned to my rectory, and Signor Romualdo, Clarimonde's lover, withdrew from the poor priest, with whom he had been in such singular company for so long. I only saw Clarimonde the following night, who said to me as the first time at the church doorway, "What have you done, wretch? Why did you listen to that stupid priest? Weren't you happy with me? What harm had I done to you to give you the right to violate my tomb, exposing the miseries of my nothingness? All communication between our souls and our bodies is broken forever. Farewell. You will not forget me." She dissolved into the air like mist, and I never saw her again. Unfortunately, she spoke the truth. I have cried for her more than once, and I still cry for her. I have won peace of soul at a very high price. The love of God was later not enough to replace hers. This, brother, is the story of my youth. Never look at a woman, and walk with your eyes lowered, because, however chaste and calm you may be, a minute is enough to lose eternity.